The Reverend Frank Ritchie joining me now. Frank, kia ora. Thanks for your time.
Kia ora, Andrew, and thank you. I want to preface this conversation by saying I come into this with a whole lot of trepidation. Once upon a time, I would have been quite gung-ho about this conversation,
Yeah.
but it seems to be very hard in this moment that we find ourselves to navigate a way through this that doesn't just inflame various ideas and emotions when it comes to this topic.
Hey, thank you for accepting my invitation to be on the show. And hey, as I said in the introduction, whatever we say, somebody will have a different opinion and will probably get text in response to that. I would encourage people to do so with gentleness and respect as we're required to do so in Scripture. But your experience in Israel, and to be fair, this is going back a few years ago, although the conflict in Israel goes back millennia. Talk us through your experience of what changed for you from what you saw and how you felt and how you processed that in terms of your faith. Frank, take us back to that time.
Yeah, it was 2012, and it's probably worth putting the context on the table. So I was there as part of a New Zealand aid and development organization, and I was specifically interested in the Palestinian side of the equation and Christian Palestinians,
Okay.
and what it meant to support Christian Palestinians and to support Palestinians who were facing poverty, but also to support young Palestinians who were looking at ways to be able to raise their voice that didn't involve picking up a gun.
Yep.
And to support the church on both sides of that equation. It's really easy when conflict breaks out to forget that there are Christians on both sides of that. I know that for some people, the idea of a Christian Palestinian might feel like a bit of an oxymoron.
Yep.
But there are churches in Palestine. Bethlehem is understood, which is in Palestinian territory, is understood to be a Christian city. So that was my context for going there, and I went twice in 2012, and I spent the predominant time was spent in the West Bank with Palestinians, but I spent time on both sides of the wall discussing things with people on both sides of the wall. So I got to listen to Israelis who feel fearful of rockets that get fired out of Gaza.
Yeah.
But and I got to talk to Israeli soldiers in places like Jericho in the West Bank in Palestinian territory. And of course, I got to talk to a lot of Palestinians as well, whose movements around the West Bank were limited by Israeli checkpoints. Their land was being encroached on by Israeli settlements. So got to experience all sides of that equation. And it's an area that outside of New Zealand, I've probably studied the most. Like
Yep.
I feel like I have a reasonable grasp on the wider Middle East, but then Israel and Palestine as well. And if anything shifted for me, it wasn't a significant shift in what I understood about the place. If anything, any simplistic ideas that I had about solutions and ways forward and how this conflict could be solved were just obliterated. The second trip in particular, we landed as conflict was breaking out. The Israeli Air Force had taken out a Hamas leader in Gaza that had opened up some rocket fire back, and then a bombing campaign from Israel. So the situation that we were in the middle of involved the breathing in of tear gas. There were riots each night. I remember we would be out looking at wonderful biblical archaeological sites during the day. We would come back in the evening to Bethlehem. There would be protests going on. The Israelis would be firing tear gas in. I would be talking to the New Zealand media, and that cycle would go on for days. So any sense that it could be solved easily just disappeared for me.
If anything, those were relatively peaceful days compared to what we've seen in the last couple of years, which is a stark contrast to make in that regard. And I imagine that if anything, what was an extremely complicated situation then is more complicated now. But having been there, having met the people, having seen firsthand what was happening even in 2012, does that change the way that you look at things now? Does that change the way in which you engage with the news cycle on this? Does this change what you pray for, Frank?
Yeah, it does. I imagine very real people on both sides of this equation. I have people that I count as friends on both sides of that conflict. So for me, it's not good guys versus bad guys. It's people that I like versus people that I like, and
Yeah.
two cultures that I hold in very high regard. I think Israeli culture is magnificent. I think Palestinian culture is magnificent, and in the places where the groundwork of peace and reconciliation goes on, where those two communities have been brought together, where they are brought together, what you get as a result of that is magnificent. But I also know that when war breaks out, people tend to want to pick their side, who's right and
Yeah.
who's wrong. And then the work of reconciliation, the work of the peacemakers, kind of gets put to the side, and they become the enemy of both
Mm.
almost, because the voice of the reconciler is always going to be the one that calls you to see that the other is not pure evil.
Yeah.
And so it's sad for me to know that some of those organizations that I'm very supportive of find this time extremely hard, and their work is being pushed back. So, if anything, being on the ground has me praying for people that I know on both sides, has me praying for organizations that do raise the banner of peace and reconciliation, and looking at the other as created in the image of God. And it has me silent. My big response to seeing the reality on the ground, I remember sitting in the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, on the site where tradition holds Jesus was born. I remember sitting there as the priests were doing the Liturgy of the Hours, the incense was waving around, they were chanting. Tourists were coming in and going under the altar to kiss the spot where Jesus was supposed to have been born. And I remember sitting there thinking I should pray something.
Yeah.
And I had absolutely nothing. And I remember sitting there in silence, and it felt like the only appropriate response. And I think we need to get to that point sometimes. I think protest is good. I think raising our voices and asking our politicians to say things is good. But I think sometimes the only appropriate response as well is just to sit in silence and grieve and call on the God who, we hope would do something in the midst of the whole thing.
Yeah. It seems that the war and the conflict that you saw in 2012 in Israel and the West Bank and in different places has travelled to all different parts of the world, and it's here in New Zealand as well. Not in the same way. It's not tear gas. It's not rockets. It's not tanks moving through the streets. But the conflict is real between the people in communities, in families, even in churches, who have perhaps felt the need to take a side on this one. Just as the people of Israel, the people of Gaza need peace, they need grace, they need miracles in that space. Perhaps we need grace in this part of the world for each other, for people who have strongly held different opinions than our own.
Yeah, and that's not to say that we shouldn't step back from the opinions that we hold and raising the banner of justice, whatever we think that looks like.
Yeah.
But we should never lose sight of the other side as people created in the image of God. Some of the best stories I've heard are people turning up to protest in New Zealand and being on opposite sides of the equation, doing their chants at each other, but then hearing glimmers of stuff that might have happened afterwards, where just the humanity of the other is recognized. If we lose that, we get into a very dangerous space. And if I think about the personification of evil, if I think about Satan, Satan is about division,
Yeah.
and is about degradation, and is about forcing us apart. So the work of reconciliation at all levels is the work of God. Holding on to the view of the humanity of the other is the work of God. And the more we disagree, the more that work becomes extremely important.
It's not an easy work, but hey, as you say, it's the work of God, not saying, hey, this is something which we should do under our own strength, but recognize the need for God, recognize the need for the miracle of reconciliation and restoration in these spaces, yes, in Israel and in Gaza, but in other parts of the world as well. Frank, thank you for accepting my invitation, my widow, to be on the program today. Thank you for the wisdom that you've shared. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.